One of the most unique lenses from Tamron has come out this year in the form of a zoom lens, but not just any zoom lens, a portrait zoom lens, and that is the Tamron 35mm to 150 f2.8-4, and we're gonna have a look at what this lens is all about. One of the most unique things about this lens is the actual focal range that it covers. So it covers from 35mm, which is a nice and wide focal length, all the way up to 150, which is your more narrow telephoto focal length, which is great for all types of portraits. Talking about the design of the lens, it's basically an identical construction to the 17 to 35mm f2.8-4, but this lens covers you for the rest of the range that the 17 to 35 doesn't cover you for. Now, what I really like about the lens is that the markings of the focal length on the actual lens reflects what typical portrait users would shoot at. So you've got 35mm, 50, 85, 105, 135, and 150. Now on the lens itself, you've got a nice and wide zoom ring, and then you've got your focus ring in front of it. I've only got one gripe with the focus ring, and it's that when you use the autofocus function, the focus ring does turn. So if you do have your fingers up towards the front barrel of the lens, you will feel it move and you could possibly interrupt the focusing. So make sure when you're using the lens, make sure to keep your hand far back on the nice and wide zoom ring. On the side of the lens, you've got two switches. You've got an autofocus manual focus switch as well as image stabilization, which would be great, especially when you're shooting at the higher end of the lens. In terms of its construction, it is very similar to the 17 to 35, which means you will get moisture resistance in it. It's made of a nice hardened plastic, so it feels pretty good in your hands when you're using it. So to go over the tech specs of the actual lens, you've got an aperture range of f2.8-4, which gives you a fairly good range for low light performance as well as depth of field flexibility. Now, although it's not 2.8 throughout the whole lens, you will still get some pretty good separation from the background when you are shooting at 150 at f4 because of the effects of compression. Now, as any other Tamron lens, you've got your standard low dispersion elements as well as your spherical elements just to help with chromatic aberrations and color fringing, and it's also double coated as well. The first coating being B-bar coating just to help with surface reflections and glare, and then you've also got fluorine coating as well to protect it against the elements and against smudging as well. In terms of autofocus, the lens does house a silent drive motor. In addition to that as well, a microprocessor too, just so you can get fast and quiet, accurate results. So now we're going to take this lens out for a spin with a Canon full frame body. Now normally we have a large selection of full frame bodies for rent, but they're currently all out, so I am stuck with the good old reliable Canon 6D Mark I. One thing I really want to stress on this lens, and I've said it earlier in the video, is that the focal length is really versatile. Now, even if you're not going to be using this for portrait and you're just going to be using it as a everyday telephoto lens, starting at 35mm is quite a good focal length to start out. Get a pretty nice and wide landscapey frame of view, and then you can go all the way to 150 just to get that bit further in distance and a bit narrow as well. So like right now, I'm able to shoot those buildings down the other end of George Street, but also I can pull it back and shoot the full scene of George Street. And I think that versatility is fantastic. To top it off as well, I can see this being really handy for portraits as well, because you're going to be able to get your wide portraits as well as your tight portraits too for those headshots. All right, so talking about focus performance, the lens is really quick. It nails focus quite easily. My only thing with the lens is this does move and you can feel it move. I don't know if that's going to be annoying to you or not, but to me, it's nothing too bad. But a couple of times I have forgotten and I have put my finger up towards the barrel and it's like I've kind of interrupted the focusing. So it's just, yeah, make sure, as I said before, Just keep it back towards the zoom ring so you don't interrupt the focusing. Now for some people, having a lens being 2.8 the whole way, such as this, would have made this a killer of a lens, although it would have been a lot bigger and probably not at the price point that this lens is at. So this lens is really for people who are dabbling into portrait and really want a pretty good quality telephoto lens that is a large number of years better than your standard kit lens that you would get, for example, like a 55-200 or a 55-250. You'll get a really nice sharp photo, super fast autofocus, and you get to play around with depth of field, which is really cool. Lastly as well, using this lens for a while, I didn't really think about it before. The size of it is decent, but it's really light. So if you're traveling with a full frame body, which is already heavy, and you're looking for a pretty versatile lens that's kind of similar to a 24-105, but a bit more range on that other end of the spectrum, 35-150 is a pretty good all-rounder lens. Today's sample images were shot with a Canon 6D Mark I and a Tamron 35-150. To start off, the image quality on the 35-150 is great. In terms of sharpness, we found the lens to perform best between f4 and f11 throughout the focal length, and shooting at f2.8 does produce some vignetting, which is apparent when shooting at 35mm. However, this should be an easy fix with a correction profile in post-processing. Overall, the lens does produce some pretty good imagery, and for a person who wants to experiment between a large variety of focal lengths for portraits, the 35-150 gives you the depth of field, sharpness, and pop that you would need to produce a good portrait. So for current owners of the 17-35mm f2.8, or for a person who is looking to step up their kit lens for a relatively good telephoto and portrait lens, then we highly recommend the 35-150. You get a large variety of versatility in terms of focal length performance. You can shoot nice and wide portraits as well as nice and tight portraits, but you don't have to necessarily use it for portraits either. The lens is super flexible enough for you to shoot some nice landscapes too, as well as some sports and action photography. Considering the price of the lens as well, this is a good lens for people who are at an intermediate level of photography or beginners looking to play around with depth of field and low light performance. If you have any questions on the Tamron 35-150, pop them in the comments below. Make sure to follow us on our Facebook, Instagram, as well as our blog to stay up to date with our latest events and workshops and what's going on in store. And as always, if you enjoyed this video, hit the like button and the subscribe button so you don't miss out on our latest updates as we upload weekly.